Welcome. I'm Shelly O'Neill from the Green Velvet Couch, and I'm a therapist, a wellness coach, and certified corporate wellness specialist. On this podcast, I have the honor of talking to people who will be sharing their inspiring stories about how they've overcome obstacles to really live their life to the fullest. Hopefully, you'll leave the podcast being challenged, informed, and sharing a few laughs as we talk about hard things in a relaxing and fun manner. And as the owner of a 100-plus employee healthcare company, I know firsthand that corporate wellness is personal wellness.
I'm so excited and honored today to be here with Maurie McGarvey, and I'm going to let her share a little bit about her bio and her experience, but we're super, super excited to have you here today.
Thank you.
I just know that health and wellness is just a passion of yours, and then working with organizations and companies. And I want to hear about your Google leadership experience as well.
Thank you so much. I'm so honored to be here with you. And this is a really exciting opportunity for me and to meet you and to spend this time with you. So thank you so much. Well, just to begin a little bit to tell you about me, my background, I am a native Paducan, was born here and went to college and came home after college to work. And I was one of four children. I had a sister who was born with spina bifida. So when I came home from college, I did that largely because I wanted to be with my family, help care for her if needed, and just to be here again. I have two brothers, and they had left. They were older. I was by far the youngest by about 8 years from my closest sibling. So they had already moved, and so I came home and began to kind of build a life here. And that started with finding work and hopefully a career that I thought was going to be meaningful. I started working at a local bank, a community bank here. It was then Citizens Bank, back several iterations before US Bank, and had a wonderful 12 years there, learning so much about the banking industry. Now, let me offer this disclaimer. I haven't had a math class since 10th grade in high school. If you ask me to do any mathematical calculations, I need to get my calculator out. Math, economics, these kinds of things were not something I studied. And so in Paducah, though, at the time, there weren't a lot of opportunities for young women right out of college. And so that was one, however. And so I started in that career there and began to have opportunities because people were very good to me. And I had opportunities there to learn a lot about how a bank functions. So fast forward those 12 years and an opportunity came up at Paducah Bank here, obviously in Paducah, and moved to Paducah Bank. And within about 6 months, moved into the human resources department there. I had studied paralegal studies in college, so I thought I wanted to go down a law path and had a chance to do that for about 10 months with a law firm here and great experience. What I studied in school was not what I actually wanted to do. But I was able to use what I learned in terms of understanding law to apply it then to human resource law and understanding, how to create an environment that is, complies legally and ethically and morally, and how to create that sort of environment in the workplace. Had the most wonderful leaders and mentors at Paducah Bank who gave me the opportunities to really learn how people, we humans, how we tick, what we need, and to be able to create an environment that would impact a culture around care and creating safe spaces for people to learn, grow, make mistakes, and get beyond those mistakes. And so I've been there now 28 years and been just one of the most fulfilling experiences of my life to get to build this career there with all of these people supporting me and my having the opportunity to support them also.
Well, when we talked about you potentially coming on the show, what I was so excited about was, you're such a good example of, successful and happy professionals and people, but people don't just wake up that way. And I loved your story and your journey. And that's really what our whole podcast is about, is how do happy and successful people, how do they get to that place? And we're still on that journey. But yeah, so you really then pretty quickly after about 12 years were put in a place where you were you were really helping as the HR director, helping employees not only function at work, but function overall.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. Going back to, I'm reflecting a little bit about those early days when I was just trying to make sure that I did everything right, that I made sure we were creating an environment where people, were seen and felt like they were as important to the bank as they in fact were. I wanted them to know that and feel that. Through the journey of that, recognizing what you just described, that there are ebbs and flows to every aspect of our lives, and in most especially our work. I think a lot about what work is and what it means to each of us and how it fulfills a sense of belonging and purpose in our lives. And work is, we hear a lot and have for some time about work-life balance. I think of it more as work-life harmony. It's how do we find the harmony between the work that's really important to us, how that informs our whole life, and then how our whole life informs our work. Because we are whole people when we go to work. When we live our whole lives, we're not compartmentalized as much as maybe we were told that early on in our careers, leave your personal stuff at the door when you come to work. That's not realistic and it's not healthy. And so learned early on that we needed to ensure that the space that we created was one in which people could bring their whole selves in and they were able to know that if they were struggling with something, if they were carrying something, we recognize that that impacts then their ability to focus, their ability to collaborate, their ability to really bring their best work product as well. So creating that space was really important. But to your point, your question is you're right. We don't just wake up one day sense of, okay, now I'm successful, or now I'm complete, or now I'm whole. This continues, I believe, always, hopefully, for each of us. If we've learned everything we're here to learn, then there's no reason for us to be here anymore.
Right.
It's the whole experience of life as a journey. And so for me, it wasn't any different. It's the same as for everyone. As I mentioned, my family, I had a sister who was differently able than the rest of us. And
I love that term, differently able versus disabled. Because you're dealing with a chronic illness.
absolutely, absolutely. Not only the experience of living with her and watching her live her life, but watching my mother care for her always. My sister lived to age 42, and my mother, when she became pregnant with her, and then my sister was born, at that point, as a 26-year-old young woman, my mother had to change her entire path for her life because she committed to the care of this child of hers. And she already had one son. And so everything she did then at that point was for the care of her family and not, as I mentioned, the path that she anticipated in her early life. And so for me, when I came along, watching her make the commitment and the sacrifice informed how I was going to approach then how I lived and interacted with others. The moments I do recall very vividly of being, angry at, the creator of
Which
the
is
company,
normal.
which I learned later was normal. Why is this situation for my sister? Why is this situation for my mother? My father, of course, caring for the family as well. And learning from that anger and that frustration a little, well, actually a lot more about how much we have control over and how much we don't. And then it becomes, I believe, a matter of choice about how we want to think about what we're seeing and what we're perceiving, and how we want to apply judgment to a situation, and how we then want to think about, okay, do I want to feel anger about this, or do I want to feel gratitude? Do I want to feel a sense of, peace about it, or do I want to carry, this frustration out into all my relationships, and every choice in between all of that. And so I think that's what that really taught me is how much our choice of how we think then determines how we live. So yeah, I think
Yeah,
that's how it started for me, and I could have allowed that to make me unhappy, what I decided to do, and I did read a lot. I'm a a bit of a voracious reader. I don't read any fiction. I don't wanna read real stuff. And so what that really did for me was taught me how to discover how I did, in fact, wanna move forward with my life, and that it is everything that we do and encounter is a matter of choice about how we want to relate to that situation.
sure.
And it could be that anger is the right emotion at that moment, righteous anger about correcting an injustice or
Yeah,
righting a wrong.
absolutely.
I have learned that sort of stepping outside of myself and looking at my thoughts and deciding, all right, do I want that thought to inform a behavior that moves this way or a behavior that moves that way? If I go this way, that could lead to more peace, maybe, but this way could lead to more anger and
Pain.
pain, suffering. And so that really was sort of the catalyst for me to watch and learn. And from there, I'm married, and my son was 4 years old when his father and I divorced. So that that experience also was an opportunity for me to decide how I wanted to perceive things that I felt at the time were happening to me.
And I love that you're sharing your story because the fact is that life happens to all of us. And
Right.
I say this often, in a lot of the speaking events, that if you can breathe, if you can blink, life's going to happen to us.
Yes.
And it may be something like a chronic illness, it may be a divorce or whatever that is. But when it happens to us, it never ever looks the same. So then choosing to go ahead and designing what you want your life to look like, knowing that, life can mess that up and deal me a different card, but there's beauty in the brokenness.
Yes.
There's beauty in the pain,
Love that. Yes.
and there's healing, and there's so much happiness because I always think life like it's like a beautiful quilt,
Yes.
like a patchwork quilt, and there's beautiful pieces, and there's some pieces they're just kind of scraps and leftovers, and you just kind of put them in there.
Right.
My grandmother quilted, and she would use anything. We're very practical Irish family, so I'm like, oh, I think that's so and so's PJs there, and maybe my grandfather's T-shirt, but
I love
hey,
that. That's great.
but it does at the end. Life is like that patchwork quilt, and there's beautiful pieces, and there's pieces that aren't beautiful, but when you put it together, it's colorful
Yes.
and
Yes.
it's taken care of you and it's made you who you are and it's just part of you.
Absolutely. You reminded me of something when I think about emotions and I think about all the emotions that we feel, there are so many emotions that we think we have to feel either this or that, as if there's some duality, and if I'm not sad, then I'm happy. If I'm not happy, then I'm sad. All these emotions, gosh, I don't know how many emotions have been discovered, but more than 100, of course, different emotions can live within us simultaneously. They can all coexist and they can sort of rise and fall and ebb and flow and sort of show themselves a little bit more or a little bit less at certain moments in our lives when our thoughts start to impact those emotions.
Yeah, they're not exclusive.
They're not exclusive, absolutely. You were describing the quilt and the pieces of that, and I was also reminded of there's this beautiful sculpture, I wish I could remember where it is, and it's a woman, she's on her knees, she's open, and her chest is broken open, and light is pouring out. And, I can't even recall in this moment what the name of the sculpture is, it's in there. But I love that because the light to me feels like it's joy. Happiness can sometimes be predicated on some circumstance that is working well for us. I'm happy right now because this is going well. And we can reframe that if we choose to, this circumstance can be something I learn from. It can inform how I, choose to treat others, how I choose to treat myself. And in the midst of trying to discover all that, joy can still live. So for me, this sense of joy, even in the midst of the things that you would absolutely change, the things that you want to be different, the things that feel broken, joy can still be in the midst of all of that to help us find some peace and wholeness within all of it simultaneously swirling around us and within us.
And I think more people need to hear that.
Yeah.
And I remember, I was a single mom after getting divorced, had been married about 17 years, and then was divorced for 12. And that was the most difficult time. My children were all pretty young. No one was out of the house or anything. But looking back, it was such a fun time.
Sure. Yes.
So when you talk about things not being exclusive, it was fun. I had great friendships. I did things I had wanted to do, and I was always looking for the most practical and economical way to do something because I had these kids. But so it was so difficult, and there was so much pain
Sure.
that came with that. But at the same time, there were all these good things, and a lot of the friendships that I have today came from that because I developed a tribe.
Of course.
Yeah.
Sure.
And I know, like at work, you kind of do the same thing. You teach people to develop that tribe and to surround themselves with healthy people. And
Absolutely. And to do that in the workplace as well as in their personal lives.
Mhm.
And one way we try to do that is provide resources for the members of our team to have access to anything that they think might help them develop those kinds of relationships.
Mhm.
We actually about 5 or 6 years ago, it was a couple of years before COVID, we had created, we being members of our team, employees there, who created 7 different areas of focus for wellness. And within those 7 different areas, providing and identifying resources for our people to take advantage of in the event that they found that they needed, resources to help them with their physical well-being, or resources to help them with their financial well-being, or resources for their emotional well-being, and so on. So those 7 areas of wellness really were sort of the framework for us to know how we needed to make sure we were providing the benefits that our people needed to be able to thrive, in the workplace, but to take all of that and apply it in their lives as well to whatever degree was beneficial for them. And so those 7 areas of wellness, in COVID, everything became about physical wellness and mental and emotional wellness, of course. And as we know, since COVID, physical continues and mental is really showing itself as an area that we all need resources for. And again, those areas of wellness don't exist on their own either. They all impact each other. Our mental well-being, our emotional well-being, our social well-being all impacts how we're feeling physically, and so on.
what I saw for many years is someone would come into my office for depression, anxiety, or something like that. And as that improved, their emotional health improved, then we had to focus on their spiritual health, their financial health, because maybe they had extreme credit card debt and a bad credit score, and that their housing was an issue. So then they had financial issues, or they weren't, when people are depressed and anxious, the last thing they want to do is move.
Right.
So then their physical health would be impacted because they weren't walking or they weren't, eating healthy. So it was affecting, and that's when I really started developing or referring to the 4 pillars of wellness, because I'm like, okay, we're doing well with your emotional health, but when you walk out my door, you're still dealing with, housing, credit, physical health issues. You have no spiritual health whatsoever. You feel very abandoned,
Of course.
and you have no type of spiritual faith at all. And one of the things in working with people who have gone through really tragic things is I've noticed that people that get through that and go on to have a wonderful life have some type of spiritual wellness. And it may be that they don't go to church, or it may be
Sure.
that they're super involved in their church, but they have some sort of spiritual basis, foundation, connection.
Absolutely. That has been a really significant aspect of my personal experience as well. So I appreciate your bringing that to the conversation, because I went through a divorce in 2002. and had been in a church always and been a member, sang in the choir, did all those things, and it had a lot of meaning for my life through those years. And gosh, the church I was a member of, parents, my father had been a lifelong member there. In fact, his mother, my grandmother, had been a lifelong member. So we had this long history there. And when I divorced, that dynamic sadly changed within that particular congregation. And so I consider myself to be a Christian. I left at that point and moved to the Episcopal Church, the Episcopal faith, and have been a member of an Episcopal parish here ever since. But in those 20 years since that happened, 21 years, I have I've had this wonderful, fulfilling opportunity to open my awareness to beliefs and systems even that inform my spirituality beyond a religious structure. And for me, while I am so grateful for my Episcopal parish and the people there, and it is very important to me, at the same time, I've explored other ways of thinking about having a creator and whether we call that God or source or whatever that may be. Each one, of course, must decide that for themselves. And and so the last 20 years have been this wonderful journey for me to be able to say, okay, I'm not bound by one particular construct. I can explore spirituality for me in this way or in that way as well. And I have read so much. I really dove into particularly those first 10 years or so, into learning about other ways of thinking about spirituality and how we care for each other. And I've learned so much from one of my favorite authors and speakers is Eckhart Tolle.
Oh, I
And
love
yes, oh my
him.
goodness,
Yes.
his teachings have had a huge
Yes.
impact on me. And I heard him speak in 2018. And so I've continued to and do continue and I do expect to continue trying to keep that awareness open to learn
Right.
more because I just have my experience, that's all I have, and I can learn from everyone and their experience. And so I do want to, and I intentionally try to stay open to learning from others and their experiences as well.
I would have identified as being very religious until I went through a divorce, and throughout that journey, I would now say that spiritual, and that's probably in my mind, they're very different things. You can be religious and be spiritual at the same time, but before I was really good at being involved in church. I wasn't so good about developing my own faith and my own connection. So how did it kind of transpire from your job? Because I know you did the Google leadership. So was your health and wellness journey, I know it started with like your family, and then some of the things that you were going through.
Sure.
But then was it just magnified by work, or was it your own things that were going on?
Sure. Great question. I was really fortunate, still am, to be in an environment in which every member of our team is actually an owner of the company. One of the most powerful benefits that we have is employee ownership, literal stock ownership. So it's a gift from the bank to us that we each own stock in the company. And so we're literally owners. And that then allows us to create this mindset of ownership. So it's a different dynamic than when one might go into work and, um, I'm an employee, I clock in and out, and when I go home, I don't think about it anymore. So
Somebody else's problem.
somebody else's problem, I'm off the clock, that kind of thing. This is more of all right, there are 157 of us who are co-owners of this organization and everything that we do for each other and for our community and certainly our customers and clients. And so that began to sort of show that wellness in some form. At the time, I remember thinking, I don't know how it looks yet, but wellness, and again, how we show up as whole people every day, that that approach is going to differentiate us. I believe that it differentiates the experience of the people who are on the team and then how they interact with their families and friends. And so I started to sort of notice this from an ownership perspective that well-being, whatever that meant to each person on the team, was going to be something that was going to help us be different and have a different experience for our people. So actually about that time, this was in 2015, I believe, about that time is when I learned about this school at Google. And this school is called Search Inside Yourself. So it was a curious play on words.
Yeah,
For us.
especially for Google.
Yes,
I don't.
search, and they were,
Yeah.
that's pretty insightful for all these computer engineers to figure this out. But what they did, in fact, I learned later, they discovered that they have these brilliant people, and they could come in and do all the things that Google does in the world. And they sat down, they stared at a computer all day, and someone was right next to them on either side, but they didn't know how to collaborate with each other. They didn't see each other as fellow human beings collaborating again toward an end. They just saw themselves as a set of skills. And I go in and I apply the skills. Google created this approach. It's based on emotional intelligence. And they created this approach that they call mindfulness based emotional intelligence. And they offered it within the company. It quickly became the most popular training and employee development opportunity that they had, and then discovered in about 2013 or 14 that they would offer it outside of Google. And that's what they did. They created a separate nonprofit to offer it, and then allowed people from the world to apply to come to the school.
How long were you there?
So it was a whole year. I didn't go and stay. I went back and forth. And it was
Okay.
over the course of a year. I went back and forth twice.
Which city did you have to
San
go to?
Francisco.
Okay.
Francisco. And the training institute was in the Presidio in San Francisco. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it was in the Presidio down at the base of, that's the Golden Gate Bridge, right? That goes from San Francisco over to, yeah. So it was, I think, originally, or a military base of some kind. And so that's where all their training happened, was over there.
Wow.
So
Amazing.
it was amazing. I can't wait to tell you about the application process, because there's something really cool.
Well, tell me about the application process and how many people were in this program, and you said it was for a year.
Yes.
Tell me about that.
So the process, when I started looking into how does then one apply for this school, learned that they ask just a series of open-ended questions. They wanted to know, less about your background per se, what you might typically ask someone relative to a resume, that kind of thing. It was more about your life and how you live your life, because I believe they wanted to know that you were going to be someone who they could share all of this training with, relative to emotional intelligence, and you would relate to it. That we want it just to be, we don't want it to be something on your resume that you came to our school. And so went through the series of the open-ended questions, and then got to the last one, and it was as follows. It said, describe a moment in your life, a moment, an instant, an event in your life that changed the course of your life. And do that in 2 minutes, and do that on a video.
That is the tall task.
That's the tall task. And
Powerful question.
it really, really was. It was the one I had to really sit with for a little while to think about, wow, there have been so many experiences in my life that I think changed the course of my life. But a moment, maybe the most significant one, finally identified what that was. And then to think about, okay, how do I talk about that in 2 minutes? And so here's what it was for me. And it was not necessarily an obvious moment, but I was reading about trees, of all things. And I learned that aspen trees they don't grow like trees, in our yards, here in Western Kentucky, an oak or a pine or a walnut that sort of grows on its own with its own roots, and take out the tree, take out the roots, it's gone. Aspen trees grow in groves, so they grow together. and their root system is connected. There's one source of energy that feeds and nourishes the entire grove from the root system, and the roots to every individual tree
That's
are
fascinating.
connected, isn't it? They're all connected to this one source of energy in the soil, in the earth, and that that tree or that source then nourishes every tree. And if one tree in the grove suffers, if it's damaged in some way, burned, whatever it is, the entire grove suffers because the suffering of that tree goes down into its roots and it goes then into the source that feeds all the trees. And that metaphor, well, that reality, that became a metaphor for me in terms of how I I think about us humans, that we all come from one source. We all get our life and meaning and being from one source of energy. And if one of us is hurt, we are not separate from each other. When one suffers, we all suffer.
Like generational trauma,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
generational wealth,
Yes.
generational opportunities.
Yes. Generational poverty.
Mhm.
And when we feel that we're suffering, then we interact with another person.
Mhm.
That assessment or judgment of that suffering that we have impacts how we interact with that person. And then that person may then go and interact in a way that reflects what they just experienced with us. It's kind of like the butterfly effect. What happens over here affects what happens, over here.
Mhm.
And that moment of just reading that in that book and understanding that we are all connected, there's I've said this to people I know, and they probably think, "What?" That there's really, this is my belief, there's really only one of us here. We're all manifest in 7 billion different forms, but there's one of us, and that one is love. And that love then informs how all the individual reflections of it then move and interact and live in our societies. And so, yeah, so that was my moment, and I try to remember that when in my perfect humanness, become frustrated, um, irritated, start to feel angry, whatever the emotion is I'm feeling. I try to remember, this is your center. This is what you believe and know, and so remember that. Stop, breathe, and reconnect to what you know is true, what is truth. And so from that, I was allowed then to go to the school. They accepted me, and I was one of 51 people from around the world, actually. The school, they had two schools. One was in San Francisco and the other was in Sydney, Australia. And I would have loved to have gone to Sydney, Australia, but the bank was kind enough to pay for this for me. So I thought, that's too much to ask. So I went to San Francisco, which was, of course, also wonderful. So over the course of a year, it was a year-long school, and over the course of that year, went to San Francisco and back twice. And in between the two visits, there were weekly exercises and weekly workshops, and we were divided into different work groups, and we would connect virtually and work through different things. And so what we learned through the course of this year was the curriculum that Google had created for this mindfulness-based emotional intelligence. And then in teaching that to us, they allowed us to bring that curriculum back to our workplaces and to share it, and of course, with our workplaces. And I've been doing that now since April of 2018. That's when we started. We do cohorts that last 8 weeks, and we typically have 7 to 10 members of our team go through each cohort. It's not required to participate, it's voluntary, but so far of our 157 people, 110 I believe have been through it. So
That's phenomenal.
it's been wonderful.
People
want
have
to
opted
participate.
to do it.
Absolutely.
What are the results that you've seen in your company, and then also in the employees' lives, their personal lives? Because what I always tell companies is a healthy employee doesn't show up. A healthy person has to be present first. And if you're a healthy person, then you can be a healthy employee. But at 8 o'clock, you don't morph into someone that you're not.
Right, right.
Although we think we can, but
It doesn't work that.
It
doesn't work that way.
Yeah, we've all tried it.
That's right. Yeah. It's in the class, we talk about it requires practice. Just like if you're a concert pianist, it's you have to practice. How do you get to Carnegie Hall? Practice,
Yeah.
practice. So this awareness of self-awareness, how we're showing up, it requires practice, and one can participate in the 8-week course, but unless it's something that each one decides to continue to integrate into their lives and practice being aware of how they show up, then it has the benefit of knowledge, but it doesn't have the benefit of true integration, into how we live and interact with each other. And so we talk about that. And in fact, we did take a little break during COVID because we couldn't sit in small spaces together. We had and they're getting ready to start again, I'm happy to say, a sort of a graduate level of the course.
Okay.
Where we would meet once a month, and everyone who'd been through the class would once a month have kind of a check-in, and we'd talk about what's going well, what are challenges right now, how are the practices that we learned, integrating for you. And we're getting ready to start that again because we did take that break and have not had a chance to get that going again. But we'll start that again actually this fall. But the difference that I hear from those who've been through the class have been in the areas of just commenting around. For those who went through it before COVID, would say, I don't know what I would have done when COVID happened, in terms of just fear and panic. And what we learned through the course really helped me have tools to be aware when I was panicking and when I was feeling concerned. One of the areas of focus in the class is around understanding our central nervous system and how our cognitive brain works in concert with the amygdala, the fight, flight, or freeze,
Yes.
fawn stress response system. And so one of the things we talk a lot about is what they call the amygdala hijack, which, as our stress response system that's been in us for 200 million years, that fight, flight, or freeze can make every decision for us if we allow it to. And so sometimes that doesn't work well. We're upset by an email we receive, and so we fire off a response. We're
Keyboard warrior.
Yes, exactly, exactly. Or we have a disagreement with someone and we yell back something we wish we hadn't. And so having an understanding of what's happening physiologically to us when we feel like there's a threat, and recognizing, okay, I do need to stop, something the Course calls a sacred pause. If I can take that sacred pause and really look at whether or not this is a real threat, or is it something I'm perceiving to be a threat because I don't know this person very well and I'm making judgments about them, or is it a threat because the last time someone said something like that to me, this happened, and so now I'm feeling defensive. And so just having an awareness of how we are functioning in our physical bodies in the world, and how our stress response is there to take care of us, but we need to step outside of that and know that we have the power to make our own decisions for ourselves, and we don't have to let that fight, flight, freeze, or fawn make those decisions.
Right.
If we will just stop and take that pause, and then we have some clarity, perhaps then we can make a decision that's better. It's the functional equivalent of count to 10, before you say anything, or sleep on it. See if you feel the same way in the morning. Sometimes we don't have the benefit of sleeping on it. So interacting with each other and recognizing that everything that we do together can be collaborative or creative, or we can go into a room with our defenses up, and chances are the collaboration won't be as rich as it could have been. And
It reminds me a lot of like the Zen 10 technique that I talk about. And basically, if you can wait 10 minutes and let that cortisol flush from your body,
yes,
you're going to self-medicate, whether it's eating, drinking, or using a substance, half as much. You're going to get half as angry. You're going to do all of those things. You're probably still going to do those things, but about half of the intensity that you normally would. So it's not as destructive and sabotaging. But I tell people Zen 10, just get through 10 minutes, whether it's a panic attack or you feel like you want to binge eat, you'll do half as much, and then that's half as much that you have to deal with. And if you keep doing that, you're reducing that versus, I've seen people ruin amazing careers because of a conflict that they had with another coworker.
sure.
Very skilled, very credentialed, sought after people who literally, at least at that place of employment, ruined their, their reputation and everything there. So I think for companies, there's a lot of value to that. It's not just how do you communicate, how do you get along, but it's actually preserving your investment in that person's skill set and that investment in their demeanor and their professional reputation.
Absolutely. If you don't mind, I'm going to take that.
Yeah,
I'm going to use that, and that's
Absolutely.
really powerful. That's very powerful, and that is something, yes, that I will integrate for myself, and I will share that with others too. It's you talk about it in the context of the workplace, and and I've also seen it in terms of people
Mhm.
hurting relationships,
Yes.
hurting themselves, and so
Sabotage.
sabotaging.
They were reactive and they weren't doing the Zen 10. They didn't have any emotional IQ. And, when I work with companies, one of the things I talk about with HR departments, and I do a lot with healthcare companies, but we also work with the marine industry.
Oh, wonderful.
So, we're kind of all over the map with the different industries, but read the room and pick up on those cues. And, I love that you said, take that sacred pause. Take that pause and gather your thoughts, and it's okay to just wait,
Yes.
versus boom, because
Yes.
So
Sometimes we may wish later that,
Yeah.
that we had done that. It's interesting because there's something that we've all been doing since the moment we were born, and that is breathing. And we don't will ourselves to breathe typically. We don't control our breath, and yet it sustains us. And so if we will take a breath, if we will reconnect back to what's happening in our bodies, our
Mhm.
physiological response to the stress, if we will just take that breath, let that breath nourish us, use those 10 minutes, do the Zen 10, then we're in much more healthy place to be able then to move forward with what we do want to have happen next. To be reminded that we value the relationship with the person, we value the career we've created, and so this moment is likely not one that we want to define all of these things. It could be, but it's better to be able to have the clarity to make the decision about that rather than allowing the stress response to do it for us. So.
And the reality is, it never feels good when you've had a reaction you're not proud of. And with my company, we have over 100 employees, and it's really interesting because I'm very aware of the times, most of the times, that I didn't handle something well,
Mm.
that I did react, or I came across frustrated or too harsh. The fact is, I've certainly done those things, and I cringe because I'm thinking, okay, I would handle that differently now. Well, yeah, because I've got a lot more information and I've honed a few more skills, and I look at things a little differently. But when you're building an organization and a company or a small business, everything you've got's riding on that.
Absolutely. Sure.
So
Sure.
so we come across with really strong reactions. So I wish that starting out, like, I knew therapeutically what to do, but to do it in the genre of of business was really challenging for
Right,
me.
right. And it's also not something we're taught. When we go to college,
Yeah.
this isn't a class.
Yes.
You're taught how to make sure your company makes money.
Yeah.
And that is then something that as a society we value and we place a lot of value on. How much money has your company made? And these are important things because sure, money sustains our lives. But what we're not taught is the fundamental structure that then can carry that company toward success or even
Yes.
success, or can certainly cause that company to fail. And that is how do we as the people who are in that company collaborate together and work together, resolve conflicts, resolve changes in course that are beyond our control.
Mhm.
If these skills are not identified and honed and worked on, then you might make money for a little while, but it's likely not going to be
Yeah.
sustained.
And it's going to be miserable when you're
Yes.
doing it.
Yes.
And I always tell companies, let's look at the dynamics. Are you, who owns your company? Is it a large, conglomerate? Is it, I've worked with companies that were started by best friends. And in our company, we're Walnut owned, but we're family run.
Yes.
Meaning that my husband and my son's our COO. So that's a whole nother layer of dynamic. So shifting roles and those dynamics, the fact is, that's real business stuff.
Yes.
And if you have to be that healthy person to get those issues resolved, or they will show up at work, whatever. And I'm sure you see that daily.
Of course. Yeah. That's an incredible dynamic to work within. Many of the people, of course, well, most of the people at our company do go home and likely don't interact over dinner.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
We're spending the day with, as you and your family do. And so it is, however, as owners, there's this mindset of we do want to have that work-life harmony, and yet we might need to text each other about something that might come up later in the evening, or email each other, or call about something that might come up with a client or customer. And so that availability continues, for most of us. We don't necessarily see each other every night, we are still connected.
Yeah,
And,
exactly.
and we feel like that, that is largely a key to our success because we stay connected. I'm sure it's a key to yours as well and your family's success.
Well, I always, I teach people you can say hard things in a kind and respectful way. So I've preached that for years, and I think I've done a pretty good job of that. However, with the dynamic of working with your husband and your son, I realize not only do I say those things in a kind way, but a loud way, in a more of an emotional way at times.
Sure.
So I've got to check myself sometimes.
Sure.
So I'm like, okay, I can say that, because there is a different emotion when it comes with when you work in a company that has a lot of relationships. So, and I like with Paducah Bank, the fact is a lot of people have lived here, they've grown up together, they've gone to school together, they have a history outside of work, and that history may be wonderful or not so wonderful.
Great point. And what I heard you describing, what came to my mind was a sense of safety. Yeah. So when you're there at home and perhaps the interactions are more emotional, you feel a sense of safety with them, and to be able to have conversations in that way and show them those emotions, and they feel safe with you as well. And absolutely, in fact, one of the things that we talk about at the bank, many companies have, core values. We have something we call our DNAs, sort of the thing that this outline of things that are who we are, our DNA. And one of those DNAs is that it's safe here. That you can make a mistake. You can know that in the midst of that, you can say, that's mine. I did that.
Which is what healthy people do.
Exactly.
They own it. They take responsibility.
Absolutely.
Because we all have missteps and we all make mistakes. Yeah.
Of course. And to be able to, as someone with that person, to say, there's no blame. We're not going to continue to remember this and bring it back up over time. Okay, let's acknowledge what didn't go like we wanted it to. Let's make sure that we're correcting that path for going forward. And then we just go forward, and we don't continue to think about, that person did this or that. So this sense of feeling blamed, hopefully we have removed that. And but it's there or not there based upon the interactions between two people, or maybe
Hmm.
a few
Right.
more. We each have to choose to say, "Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. I made a mistake." And then the next one has to choose to say, "It's okay. I'm here to help you fix it, and let's do that and move forward." So everything comes down to choice. A choice in a moment of how we want to show up for ourselves and for each other. Another thing we talk about at the bank is something, and you don't hear this a lot in business, but it's called the three loves. And so we talk about love at Paducah Bank, but the three loves are this. We talk about how we want to make sure that we love our customers more than we love our products. Banks have checking accounts and
Sure.
all these things, but we have to love our customers. The products are there to help ensure that we take care of those customers. We have to love our people. We have to love our team. If we're not loving our team and taking care of our team, they can't take care of our customers, and they can't take care of the communities we live in. And we have to love ourselves. It's again, the functional equivalent of the oxygen mask in the airplane. You can't fumble around trying to help someone next to you if you don't have oxygen.
Right. If you can't breathe,
You
exactly.
can't breathe. And so put your oxygen mask on first. And so we remind ourselves that these are the things that we love, ourselves, our people, and our customers, our community. And as we're reminded of that, then we can make better decisions about how we collaborate together.
Well, I love that. Talking about the three loves,
Yes.
I love that. I think that so you really built a psychologically safe, loving culture that lets people be healthy people and healthy employees, which is the goal of.
Yes.
And I think more and more companies are seeing the value in that, from a performance, retention, and revenue place.
Absolutely.
That it is a win-win. And I think companies will say to me, "Well, I know it's going to be really, really expensive, and we're just not in that place." And I'm like, actually, wellness doesn't have to be expensive.
Right.
It has to be effective.
Yes.
You don't need to waste money, so it needs to be something you can truly implement that will create or change that culture, but it doesn't have to be expensive. In our community, you're known as the wellness person, which I love that.
Very nice.
So before we wrap up, I have to ask you about the labyrinth.
Oh, yes.
I gotta know. I have to know how that came to be. Yes, in your yard, because I think I want one.
Yes, I'll tell you, it is. I'm so glad you asked about it. It is, well, goodness, yes. We have a labyrinth in our backyard, and it was something for me that I think when I moved to the Episcopal Church, as I shared earlier, 20 years ago, there was a labyrinth in the floor of the parish hall. It's called. So it's the gathering place, of course, for meals and that kind of thing. And so there was a labyrinth on that floor. At about the same time, you're probably familiar with our friends at the Etc. coffee shop in Lower Town.
Love that place.
Yeah.
Love it.
Love that place. Love those people.
I can't stop saying the three loves now.
Exactly.
You changed me today.
Well, I'm glad. But the Etc. and the owners, Alan and Johanna Rhodes, at the time they were the owners, their family, and baristas there own it now. But at the time, they had the property right next to the coffee shop itself, and they put in a labyrinth. If you've been to Lower Town and gone to the coffee shop, you've likely seen the labyrinth that sits adjacent to the coffee shop right there. And so I just became really curious about it. And I used to think it was a maze, and of course since learned different, and we'll talk about that. But I began to research it to try to understand what is a labyrinth, because I'd also seen it, of course, at my church. And so in reading about it and in talking to Alan Rhodes, who he told me about it, I learned that labyrinths have been around in the world for more than 4,000 years. They have been a tool that different religions and spiritual groups have used as for meditation, for if you know anything about sacred geometry, it has been a point of reverence that represents inner work and connection to higher power. And so in all the different descriptions that has has been over the course of the centuries. And so what I also learned was that this particular pattern of labyrinth, there are several different that exist, came from a cathedral in Chartres, France. It's Chartres, pronounced Chartres, France. And there's a cathedral there, and it is the floor of that cathedral. And oh gosh, in this moment, I'm not remembering when that was built, but it's hundreds of years old. And so that pattern has been replicated around the world. People who have wanted to put them in different places, including different churches, throughout the world. And it is the pattern that is in my parish in Paducah and the pattern that is there at etc. And when my husband and I we married, and we had been living in an apartment in Lower Town and loved it there, but we recognized we're getting a little older and probably needed to be somewhere where everything is on one floor, and so we built a house in Paducah. And one of the things that really was speaking to me for some time was having access to this a labyrinth, because I was beginning to I was looking at them online. I would spend time sort of visually tracing labyrinths online. And I thought, can really be for me an important spiritual tool. And that is what it has, in fact, become. And it is a tool that I, here's why it's so meaningful for me. It is a tool that allows an individual to enter in to this dynamic, this pattern, this path. And as you walk it, it takes turns, and it has switchbacks, and it goes out and it comes in. Ultimately, these paths and these changes in path lead to a center. The center, that is then your place of energy, of source, of love, for me, and reminding myself of that. And then as you move into the wind, you move from the center out into the world. It's sort of that same experience. You have to go through a path, a design. It switches back, it takes turns, it curves, and then by the time you come back to the beginning, you've had this journey of going toward the center, reconnecting to center, pulling away from it, noticing what that feels like, coming back in, noticing what that feels like. And so having this opportunity, and if you walk it, it typically takes about 30 minutes. Just having this 30 minutes of opportunity to remind myself of what's important, of why I guess why I'm here, why we're all here, and how that can just sort of restore me and allow me to then go back and care for the people I get to care for. And so it was unusual when the neighbors, I think, when they saw it, like, what's this labyrinth doing in the backyard in the neighborhood? What is that exactly?
Are you walking in
Why
circles?
are you walking in circles? Are you okay? And it's there all the time. So what's really wonderful is to go out about 10 o'clock at night when the moon is shining, and to walk it in the moonlight and in the quiet, and especially after a challenging day, to go out there and just have that time. It's a meditation. I'm a practicing meditator, if you will. I'm practicing yogi also, and so it's all different forms of meditation for me. Being on the yoga mat, being on the meditation cushion, being in church, another form of meditation, and then the labyrinth is a walking meditation. Allows me to move my body like yoga does in a particular way, to move my body while it's a moving meditation. So while I'm reflecting and connecting back to center. So yeah, so that's it. I brought this book too, that's this wonderful book that taught me so much. It's called Walking a Sacred Path by Lauren Artress. So if you're interested in learning more about a labyrinth,
Yes, I'll have to check that out.
It taught me so much.
I think it's a powerful exercise for people. And I think that's the thing that gets lost in wellness is people can look at it as not necessary, but they really don't understand how powerful it is to their career, profession, or to their personal life. Because,
Absolutely.
I have seen people just deal with horrific things and terrible traumas and catastrophes and things. But if they have on their path to recovery, if they focus on health and wellness, whether or not they see a therapist, I mean, that's a good thing if they do, and we want that to be a good fit, but many people don't. Many people recover without talking to a professional, and using things like what you described in their own life also results in a wonderful healing journey and a wonderful, outcome.
Of course. And, I will say, to add just all the way back to the beginning of our conversation, in my life story, the time I spent with a therapist was invaluable. When I went through my first divorce, as I mentioned, a 4-year-old son, I don't know what I would have done without the help and the guidance that my therapist at that time provided for me. And I'm so grateful when someone, at the bank or a friend may come to me and say, I'm thinking about this. And I'm so gratified to get to share names and phone numbers and say, please, reach out and find the resources that you need that are meaningful for you. And we certainly have these opportunities, and if we can remind each other and ourselves that yes, these are important resources for our mental health, and if we don't have our mental health, we likely won't have our physical health and sustaining relationship, family, and in careers. It will be extremely difficult. So yes.
Well, thank you for sharing your journey.
Oh my goodness.
Just exciting, and just all the different things that you've encountered and you've gone through, and then also just where you're at today, and really lead people to change their lives to live a much healthier life. So that's exciting.
Well, Shelly, thank you so much. I can't tell you how much this has meant to me to get to spend this time with you. It really is a joy. Speaking of joy, to get to share this and learn from you, and I do think that we're all each other's teachers and students, and so if in any moment we can share and learn from each other, I think that's invaluable. So thank you so much.
You're so welcome.
Thanks so much for listening to Shelly O'Neill from the Green Velvet Couch. If you're enjoying the show, please rate, subscribe, and review where you listen to your podcast. That helps others find the show and begin their own wellness journey. Thanks again for tuning in. Until next time, go live your best life.